Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, if you have a scary story you'd like to share, feel free to submit it in the comments below or send it to me on my email. Now, let's get into tonight's stories. This all happened around a year ago, right after the holiday season. I live in a small suburban neighborhood that borders a forest in southern Quebec. It's quiet. Most residents know each other, which honestly adds a warmer atmosphere to the area. During winter, I take my dog Monty on walks through the local forest. He's a Rottweiler Husky mix, perfect for someone like me who enjoys going for runs. The forest has several trails, none too challenging for casual hikers. I remember it being an afternoon in late February. I'd just finished a late lunch and decided to burn some calories with Monty. As usual, he went ballistic when we turned the corner toward the forest entrance. It was relatively cold that day. Fresh snow had blanketed the paths overnight, creating this nearly blank canvas. I let Monty off the leash so he could run around. There were a few yellow patches in the snow, along with some boot prints, signaling that several people had already taken their dogs out earlier. Most people prefer morning walks since the sun sets around 4 p.m. in winter, so I didn't expect to see anybody out at that time. After walking for around 30 minutes, we came to a fork in the path. I noticed one trail hadn't been walked yet, so, feeling semi-adventurous, I decided to take it. I have a pretty solid memory of these trails, so I knew exactly where I was going. The trail led to a clearing, which was perfect since I wanted to check out the native birds with the binoculars I'd gotten for Christmas. I remember scanning the surroundings until I saw a strange shape along the tree line in the distance. When I focused my binoculars, I saw a blue tarp and what looked like a makeshift shelter. As curious as I was to check it out, it was getting dark and I wanted to get home. Turning around, Monty and I started walking back. As usual, he ran ahead, but something seemed off in his behavior. He was much more alert, sniffing the trail more intensely than he normally would. When I looked down at the trail, my eyes widened. There was a set of footprints in the snow, much larger than my own. I remembered turning my boots over out of sheer confusion to compare them. The prints were completely different. There were no other forks in the trail, so whoever made those prints had to have passed me at some point. I figured they must have walked by while I was using my binoculars. At the time, it seemed like the most logical explanation, so I tried not to overthink it. At this point, it was significantly darker outside, but I could still make out my surroundings. As we were walking back, Monte stopped abruptly and started barking relentlessly in my direction. As I turned around, that's when I saw him. There was a man, probably around 6'4", wearing charcoal-colored snow pants and a white camo jacket. He was only about a meter away from me. He didn't make any movements toward me, he just stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. I didn't recognize him from anybody in the neighborhood, so I assumed he must have been a hiker or someone from out of town. He looked like he was muttering something to me, but I couldn't read his lips due to the lack of lighting and not knowing if he was speaking English or French, the two commonly spoken languages in Quebec. I felt like an idiot for not bringing my phone with me. I ended up trying to communicate that I was hard of hearing and that it was getting late. I got back home around 4:30. By then, it was completely dark out. I remember following my standard night routine, not really thinking much about the encounter. But in the middle of the night, something happened that still shakes me to this day. I woke up to Monty licking my hand, something he usually does to get me out of bed in the morning. I tapped my phone to check the time. To my surprise, it was 3 a.m. I noticed a message from my neighbor asking if everything was all right. The message was a few minutes old and asked about Monty, who had apparently been barking like he was possessed. I looked up from my phone to see that Monty was no longer in my room. I walked downstairs to find him barking hysterically at the patio door. As I approached the door, I struggled to see anything with my vision still blurry. I tried to focus my eyes when the motion sensor light turned on. At that moment, my heart sank. The man from the forest was standing there in my backyard. I didn't think twice. I stepped away from the door and texted 911. I don't think I've ever texted faster than I did that night. I ran upstairs with Monty and grabbed the machete from under my bed. I'm a shorter woman with a background in martial arts, but I know damn well that the best move in a fight is to not fight at all. I sat there in my room guarding Monty and myself until the police came. With my heart beating out of my chest, I sat opposite the door with Monty by my side. It didn't last long until Monty sprang up and started barking violently at the bedroom door. My hands were sweating profusely as I watched a shadow cast from underneath the door. The movement suggested the man was seconds from breaking into my room. Those had to be the longest minutes of my life as I anticipated the door handle turning or the door completely breaking in. Luckily for me, it never did. When the police arrived, I explained everything while they searched the property. The glass on the patio was completely smashed, but besides that, nothing was missing. The police found the gate in my backyard open. It leads to the forest, which is where they believe the man disappeared. I told them about the shelter I'd seen in the woods. I took Monty and some belongings to stay with a family friend for a few days while I got the patio door fixed. I never got a follow-up from the police after the incident. Ever since that day, I decided to stick to roads when walking my dog, not trying to think too much about what could have happened. My name is Ember, and I'm a 16-year-old girl from Illinois. What happened to me and my sister Kate taught me one terrifying lesson. Never trust a text message when a phone call goes unanswered. I live with my younger sister Kate, who's 15. My dad works for a deforestation group about 30 minutes from our house. It was a normal morning on December 5th. Kate and I were getting ready to go to the movies. We decided to watch Terrifier 3, which had some Christmas stuff in it. We knew it was 18 plus, but nobody paid much attention. We looked older anyway. We made our way to the theater and easily got in thanks to our appearance. However, halfway through the film, as everyone was anticipating the next scene, my phone buzzed loudly enough for the whole theater to hear. Everyone turned toward me with annoyed looks. Kate and I scurried out, and I tripped, which was embarrassing enough. After we exited the theater, I checked my phone to see who'd called. It was my dad. But instead of calling back, I received a text message. "Hey, would you mind bringing me some lunch since the small cafe in the woods is shut today?" I looked over at Kate. She looked confused, but neither of us second-guessed the message since it seemed normal. We arrived home, packed some food for him, and took my car downtown to the woods. I've always loved that place. Never felt uneasy there because it's large and secluded. The scenery is amazing, with a hill that leads down to a lake perfect for fishing and photos. After a while, Kate and I got out of the car and walked down the path through the woods. I took out my phone to call my dad, but he didn't pick up. Confused, I looked over at Kate, who was just as confused as I was. Why wouldn't he respond when he just called us? I decided to message him instead, reminding him we were at the woods with his lunch. After a few moments, I saw the 3 dots appear, showing he was typing. He responded, telling us to walk down the small hill and wait for him at the lake. The sun was slowly setting since it was winter. The sky had a beautiful radiant orange glow over the hill and down the mountain. Snapping out of my thoughts, Kate pointed down to the lake where a man in black was sitting on the deck by the water with his back to us. We guessed it was our dad. We walked down a bit more and stopped a little behind him. I called out his name, but he didn't move. Kate grew uneasy, and her attitude made the scene even eerier. I slowly pulled off the hood he was wearing and revealed a man who definitely wasn't our dad. Kate and I shrieked as he turned around and began waving my dad's phone like a maniac, smiling like he was happy to see us scared. I blurted out asking why he was using our dad's phone, but he didn't respond. Instead, he lunged and grabbed Kate's arm as she screamed. Luckily, I was strong enough to pull her away, and we started running as fast as we could. The adrenaline pushed through us so much that I'd never seen either of us run that fast. Behind me, I heard stomps getting closer, so I knew we were being chased. I didn't dare turn around. Finally, we reached the car. I slammed the door shut and locked it as the man came to my window, then crouched down out of sight as I reversed and sped away back home. When we got home, my dad and mom were there. We arrived panting, out of breath, and explained the whole situation. My dad was furious and said his phone had been stolen while he was working, so he'd come back home. He called the police and filed a report. They used the IMEI number to track the device, which was still on the deck by the lake. They returned the phone to my dad, but said there wasn't much they could do since the phone was already found. I thought this was the end of it, but I wouldn't be telling this if it was. 6 hours later, around 1 a.m., I got an unknown message that said, "I like that your house is lit only by your bedroom TV." I immediately went cold and pale. I paused the TV and heard rustling outside my window. My room was on the 2nd floor. I shut my phone and listened. Slowly, I peeked through the blinds and saw the man smiling with a gun pointed at my window. I screamed and pulled away as glass shattered everywhere across my room. My parents ran in, followed by Kate. I screamed for them to crouch and told them the man was outside with a gun. When my dad went to check, the man was gone. Then we heard another loud bang and more glass breaking downstairs in the kitchen. We ran and locked the bedroom as Kate called 911. My mom hugged us as we cried in fear. A few moments later, the police arrived and searched the whole house, but nobody was there. Kate and I explained the situation again, and one of the officers said they should check the car. Surprisingly, a small AirTag was found on my tire, which explained how the man knew where we lived and why he crouched before I sped out of the woods. The police told us they'd patrol the streets and do everything they could to find the man. A few months later, he still hasn't been found, but he never returned, which I hope stays that way. Me, Kate, and my parents are still traumatized by the situation. But mostly, I felt stupid as the older sister for not being alarmed when the person didn't respond to calls and only responded through texts. All I know is that I'll be more careful and never go to secluded places again, especially when I'm responsible for someone else's safety. It was 2021, prime COVID time. One word to describe my night: nightmare. Because what I found in the driver's seat of my car after it crashed still makes me question what's lurking in those woods. Work was a disaster. I was working from home and was supposed to be meeting with my extended family upstate. I ended up finally getting off a nearly 3-hour Zoom meeting a whole hour and a half after everyone had already arrived at my parents' house. That didn't include the next 2 hours the trek up to their house would take me. I filled up 2 cups of coffee in my kitchen to take with me. God knew I'd need them. The second I opened my front door, I realized this drive would be more of a disaster than I'd thought. The snow and wind had already picked up since earlier that evening, and the streets were barely plowed. The ground had at least 2 feet of snow already, and it was supposed to snow like this for most of the night. I had to drive under 25 on most residential roads. My car at the time was a really old, crappy Hyundai, not ideal for extreme weather conditions. It didn't have anti-lock brakes either. I'm a fast driver though, so when I got on the highway, I raised my speed to 70, probably a lot faster than safe for the conditions. I finally arrived at my parents' house around 9 p.m. They'd begun dinner without me, but thankfully weren't too far along. A few drinks and gift exchanges later, I started to lose track of time. I got so caught up seeing relatives I hadn't spoken to in a while that I basically forgot I still had to drive home, even as most of my family started to leave. Once I finally got in my car, it was past midnight, and at least another foot of snow had accumulated on the ground. I was buzzed, but figured I was sober enough to drive home. Not that I condone drinking and driving at all. I was tired and simply wanted to get home. As I headed toward the highway, I realized the roads were completely dead. I made the grave mistake of raising my speed to 40 down one particular road. As I began to approach a bend, I realized my car had gone into a skid. I tried not to panic. This wasn't the first time I'd skidded. I started to steer into the skid and downshifted. But as I got even closer to the curve and my car still wasn't slowing down, I started to panic. My car went straight off the side of the road and into a tree. The airbag deployed. I was momentarily in shock from the force of the impact, but thankfully I was relatively unscathed. My car was ruined though. The whole hood was buried in a bank of snow surrounding the tree I'd hit. No chance I was pushing it back onto the road. The first thing I did was phone my roadside assistance company. They said they'd send a truck to my location, but because of the horrible conditions, it could take up to 40 minutes. I was on a deserted road surrounded by forest, with no houses for miles in either direction. So I decided to also call my parents and ask one of them to drive over and wait with me. My dad said he'd get in his car and come. As I was sitting there, I began to hear something over the sound of the wind howling outside. There were undeniably footsteps in the snow. I couldn't tell exactly from where, but they sounded somewhat distant. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out of my car, checking my immediate surroundings. I made a disturbing discovery. There were boot prints in the snow circling all around my car and then leading away from my passenger side door into the woods. I felt sick to my stomach. I also noticed there were drops of blood in the snow. I opened my driver's side door and grabbed my 9mm out of the glove compartment. Clutching it in my right hand, I began to follow the prints leading into the woods. At that moment, I was convinced someone was out there with me. As I followed the prints, the drops of blood began to grow larger. It looked like someone had been bleeding profusely. And then I saw some dark mass lying in the snow just past the tree line. I couldn't tell what it was. I was just praying it wasn't a person. I took out my phone and enabled the flashlight. It wasn't a person. It was a dead deer, seemingly slaughtered by some larger predatory animal. The stomach was ripped completely open, and shockingly, the deer had been completely decapitated. I swept the flashlight over the surrounding few feet, but I didn't see the head anywhere. I decided this was getting too weird for me, and I started heading back to my car. I got back to my car and opened the driver's side door. As soon as I did, it was all I could do to keep myself from vomiting on the spot. Lying in the driver's side seat of my car was the severed head of the deer, placed on the seat as if it was looking right at me. I booked it out of there and made it a few minutes down the road before headlights appeared in the distance. I ran toward the car, waving my hands and shouting like a madman, still holding my handgun. Thankfully, it was my dad. He stopped the car and asked me what the hell I was doing. I got in the passenger seat and explained everything to him. And I kid you not, he literally didn't believe me. I felt more comfortable going back to my car with my dad, though, so he drove the two of us over there and we got out. The footprints were still all around my car, but the deer head was gone. All that remained was a large spot of blood on my driver's side seat. I think once my dad saw that, he started to believe me. The deer corpse was also gone. All that remained were drag marks in the snow. The tow truck finally showed up and towed my car. My dad asked if I wanted to call the police, but honestly, I just didn't have the energy to file a report. I was exhausted and just wanted to go to sleep. I figured calling the police wouldn't accomplish anything anyway. So that's my story. I have no idea who was in the woods that night and what they wanted. Maybe they were just trying to scare me. Or maybe they had worse intentions. You know that feeling when you hear a knock at your door late at night? That moment of hesitation before you check the peephole. This story comes from a viewer named Sarah, and what started as an annoying disturbance turned into something she still can't explain to this day. She moved apartments 3 months ago, and she's never told anyone the real reason why. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building in Portland, Oregon. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Rent was $950 a month, neighbors were quiet, and I had just started a new remote job that kept me up late most nights. It was a Tuesday in September when it first happened. I remember because I had just finished a Zoom call around 11:45 p.m. and was making myself some cup noodles in the kitchen. The hallway outside was always quiet at that hour. Most of my neighbors were either elderly or worked early morning shifts at the hospital nearby. That's when I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. I froze mid-stir, listening. My apartment didn't have a peephole, just one of those old wooden doors with a chain lock. I wasn't expecting anyone, and DoorDash that late would have texted first. I walked slowly to the door, my sock-covered feet silent on the cheap laminate flooring. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. No footsteps walking away. No voices in the hallway. Just silence. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound confident. No response. I convinced myself it was a neighbor at the wrong apartment and went back to my noodles. But something felt off. The way those knocks sounded, they were too measured, too patient. The next night, it happened again. Same time, 11:47 p.m. I checked my phone to be sure. This time I was ready. I walked straight to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting weird shadows near the stairwell. I stepped out, looking both ways. Nothing. The elevator doors were closed. The stairwell door hadn't made its usual creaking sound. Whoever knocked would have needed at least 10 seconds to disappear completely. But the hallway was long. I would have heard running footsteps. I went back inside and locked the door, my hands shaking slightly as I slid the chain into place. By the fourth night, I was expecting it. 11:47 p.m., like clockwork. But this time, I did something different. Instead of opening the door, I grabbed my iPhone and started recording. I stayed completely silent, barely breathing, waiting to hear footsteps or any sound of movement. 20 seconds passed. Then I heard it, soft, like someone shifting their weight from one foot to another. They were still standing there. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they could hear it through the door. I wanted to yell, to demand who they were, but something stopped me. Some instinct told me that engaging was exactly what they wanted. I stood there for 5 full minutes, phone recording, neither of us making a sound. Finally, I heard the faintest sound, shoes on carpet, moving away slowly. Not rushed, not scared of being caught, just leaving. I checked my phone recording the next morning. You could hear the knocks clearly, the silence, my breathing, and then, right before the footsteps, there was something else. Breathing. Not mine. It was too close to the door mic. Slow, steady breathing. Someone had been standing there, inches from my door, waiting. I stopped answering the door entirely. I put in AirPods at night, blasted music, tried to ignore it. But you can't ignore a pattern that breaks. On the 8th night, they knocked at 11:47 p.m. as usual. Then again at 12:15 a.m. Then at 12:47 a.m. 1:17 a.m. 1:47 a.m. 2 a.m. By 3 a.m. I was sitting in my bathroom with the door locked, lights on, calling my friend Jake, who lived in Beaverton, about 20 minutes away. The knocking had become constant, every 15 to 30 minutes. "Just call 911, Jake said, his voice thick with sleep. "And tell them what? Someone's knocking on my door? They'll think I'm insane." But then the knocking stopped. Complete silence. I waited in that bathroom until sunrise, too terrified to come out. When I finally opened my apartment door the next morning to go grab coffee, there was something on my doormat. A small piece of paper, folded once. My hands trembled as I picked it up and opened it. Inside, written in neat handwriting, "I know you're listening. I moved out 2 weeks later. Broke my lease, lost my $950 deposit, didn't care. I never told my landlord the real reason, just said I got a job offer in Seattle. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. Before I left, I asked Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived across the hall in 3B, if she'd noticed anything strange. She looked at me with this odd expression and said, "You mean the knocking? Oh, honey, that's been happening in this building for years. Every third-floor apartment eventually gets it." "What do you mean?" I asked. She lowered her voice. "The last tenant in your unit? Girl named Emma. She moved out in the middle of the night too. Didn't even pack. Just left everything and ran. I never found out what they wanted, who they were, or why they chose 11:47 p.m. But sometimes, in my new apartment in Seattle, I still check the peephole at that exact time, just to make sure. This story was sent in by a viewer named Evan, who swears it changed the way he looks outside at night. He lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing serious ever happened, until someone started standing at the end of his driveway every night, just watching his house. My name is Evan Clark, and in 2022, I was living alone in a rented single-story house in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. It was one of those calm neighborhoods with mailboxes lined up in a row and motion sensor porch lights that were more annoying than useful. I worked late doing IT support from home, usually shutting down my computer around midnight. My living room sofa faced a big front window that looked out onto the street. Most nights, I'd sit there with Netflix on, scrolling my phone. It was the kind of area where people walked dogs, kids rode bikes, and nothing ever really stood out. That changed in late October, on one of those nights when the air feels too still. It was just after 12:30 a.m. I remember because the next episode countdown had just started on my TV. Out of habit, I glanced toward the front window. The blinds were tilted just enough that I could see part of the street through the gaps. That's when I noticed him. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from a passing car, but there was no car. A figure was standing at the very edge of my driveway, where the concrete met the street. Not close, not trying to hide, just standing there, facing my house. I leaned forward, squinting through the blinds. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood up, hands at his sides. The street light behind him made it impossible to see his face. He wasn't moving. He wasn't on my property technically, so I told myself he was just some drunk guy or a neighbor on a call. I muted the TV to listen. No talking, no footsteps, just the faint hum of the streetlight and my own heartbeat in my ears. After a minute or two, I stood up and went to the door, keeping it locked, peeking through the small decorative window beside it. He was still there. Same spot, same posture, staring. I thought about calling the non-emergency police number, but by the time I grabbed my phone and looked again, he was gone. No car doors, no footsteps on gravel, just an empty street. The next night, I forgot about it, until 12:32 a.m. I glanced at the window. He was back, Same spot, same distance, same stillness. This time, my stomach dropped. I turned off the TV, hoping he couldn't see inside clearly. I crouched near the window, lifting one slate of the blinds with my finger. He didn't move. Not an inch. It was like he knew I was looking, but didn't care. I waited there for 10 minutes. My legs started cramping. Finally, a car turned onto the street at the far end. Its headlights swept past him. In that brief light, I saw his face for half a second. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't smiling. His expression was completely blank, eyes locked on my house. No curiosity, no recognition, just focus. As the car passed, the light moved on, and he turned around casually and walked away down the sidewalk, like he'd just finished some kind of routine. By the fourth night, I wasn't sleeping. I sat in the dark with the TV off, watching the digital clock on my cable box crawl toward 12:30 a.m. At 12:31, my porch motion light flicked on by itself. I didn't even need to look, but I did. He wasn't at the end of the driveway anymore. He was closer. He was standing halfway up the driveway now, right where my car normally sat. Hands still at his sides, no phone, no bag, no visible weapon. Just that same dead-focused stare toward my front window. My first instinct was to flip on every light in the house to let him know I saw him, but something about how calm he looked made me feel like that would give him what he wanted. Instead, I backed away from the window, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. I whispered my address and told the operator there was a man repeatedly coming to my house at night. While I was talking, I heard it, the creak of my mailbox lid outside, slowly opening and closing. I hadn't heard him move closer. The driveway was gravel at the edges. There should have been noise. The dispatcher told me an officer was on the way. It took them about 7 minutes. Those 7 minutes felt longer than my entire life. I stayed in the hallway where he couldn't see me if he was at the window. Eventually, red and blue lights flashed across the ceiling through the blinds. I waited another minute before going to the door and opening it just enough to see. The man was gone. A police cruiser was parked. I whispered my address and told the operator there was a man repeatedly coming to my house at night. While I was talking, I heard it, the creak of my mailbox lid outside, slowly opening and closing. I hadn't heard him move closer. The driveway was gravel at the edges. There should have been noise. The dispatcher told me an officer was on the way. It took them about 7 minutes. Those 7 minutes felt longer than my entire life. I stayed in the hallway where he couldn't see me if he was at the window. Eventually, red and blue lights flashed across the ceiling through the blinds. I waited another minute before going to the door and opening it just enough to see. The man was gone. A police cruiser was parked in front of my house, and an officer was already shining a flashlight around my yard and down the street. He came up and asked me to explain what happened. I told him about the past few nights, the timing, the way the guy kept moving closer. He nodded, but his attitude said he thought I was overreacting. Then he checked my mailbox. There was a single sheet of notebook paper inside, no envelope. Written in thin, blocky letters, "I'll be closer tomorrow." The officer's face changed when he read it. He folded the paper, said they'd file a report, and told me to keep my doors locked and call if I saw him again. That was it. No patrol car parked outside, no one staying overnight. Just me. I didn't wait for tomorrow. I packed a duffel bag with clothes, grabbed my laptop, and drove to my brother's apartment across town. I didn't even turn off the lights when I left. I could see my driveway in the rearview mirror as I pulled away. The street was empty. I crashed on my brother's couch and was too wired to sleep. Around 12:30 a.m., I checked my phone out of habit. No notifications, no doorbell alerts. I didn't have a camera back then. The next afternoon, the officer called me back. They had checked neighborhood footage from a house 2 doors down that had a Ring camera pointed partly at the street. He asked me a question that still bothers me. "Are you sure you actually saw someone? Because your neighbor says his camera triggered motion alerts near your driveway every night around the time you mentioned. But the video doesn't show anyone, just your house, just your driveway." The motion would trigger, but the video looked completely normal. No person, no animal, no car. I moved out a month later, broke the lease, lost money, didn't care. The landlord said, the last guy who lived there installed a camera too, said he kept getting motion alerts late at night, but nothing was ever there when he checked the footage. He left in a hurry, didn't say why. Now, even in my new apartment, I avoid looking out of any window after midnight. And every once in a while, my phone lights up with a random notification at 12:31 a.m. for an app update, an email, anything. I always wonder, if I had ignored him one more night, would he have come all the way up to the door? Or was he already closer than I ever saw? This next story is from a woman named Lena, who worked the night shift at a small motel off the highway in Arizona. She thought weird guests would be the scariest part of her job, until someone started coming to her own apartment door every night, asking for a person who didn't exist. My name is Lena Torres, and in 2021, I was living in a small second-floor apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. It was a basic complex, off-white stucco buildings, a cracked parking lot, and a pool that always seemed to be under maintenance. I worked nights as a front desk clerk at a budget motel about 15 minutes away off I-10. Because of my schedule, my morning was everyone else's late afternoon. I usually got home around 1:30 or 2 a.m., made a snack, and went to bed around 3. The building was mostly quiet at that hour. You'd occasionally hear someone's TV or a dog barking, but that was it. The first knock came on a Sunday night, right after I'd closed my laptop from watching some YouTube videos in bed. It was 2:41 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I checked my phone, annoyed. 3 slow knocks echoed down the hallway outside my door. Not banging, not urgent, just deliberate. I figured it was a drunk neighbor at the wrong apartment. It happens. People park in the wrong spot all the time in those complexes. I waited, hoping they'd realize their mistake and move on. Then the knocking came again. Same pattern. 3 slow knocks. I sighed, got up, and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. A man was standing there. Mid-40s, maybe. Short, dark hair. Wearing a faded blue button-up shirt and jeans. He looked completely normal. No hoodie, no mask, nothing threatening at first glance, but something about how still he was made my skin crawl. "Yeah?" I called out through the door. He paused, then spoke in a flat, almost tired voice. "Is Allison home?" I frowned. "There's no Allison here. You have the wrong apartment." He didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at my door, not shifting his weight, not looking around, nothing. "Sir, you have the wrong place," I repeated, a little louder. After a few seconds, he finally spoke again. "She told me to come here." His tone never changed. It didn't sound angry or confused, just certain. "Well, she gave you the wrong address," I said, backing away from the door. "You should leave." I watched through the peephole. He stared at the door a few moments longer, then turned and walked slowly down the hall, out of view. I went back to bed feeling unsettled, but I wrote it off as some awkward interaction. The next night, at 2:41 a.m. exactly, the knocking came again. 3 slow knocks. My heart dropped as soon as I heard it. I hadn't told anyone about the night before. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't mentioned it at work, but the timing was identical. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Same man, same clothes, same expression. "Is Allison home?" he asked in that same flat voice. I swallowed. "You came here last night. There is no Allison in this apartment." Silence. "Sir, if you don't leave, I'm calling the police." He blinked slowly, like he was processing the words. Then he said, "She gave me this number." He was looking directly at the peephole now. Not the door, the peephole. Even though he couldn't see me, it felt like he could. I backed away and grabbed my phone, pretending to dial even though I hadn't yet. When I looked again, the hallway was empty. By the third night, I was done being polite. I told myself that if he showed up again, I'd actually call the police. I double-checked the locks, wedged a chair under the doorknob, and kept the hallway light on outside. 2:41 a.m. 3 slow knocks. I felt sick. Every part of me wanted to ignore it, but not knowing was worse. I checked the peephole. He was closer, standing a little nearer to the door than before, like he had shuffled a few inches forward. Same shirt, same jeans. It was like he hadn't changed clothes in 3 days. Before I could say anything, he spoke. "Can you tell Allison I'm here?" His voice was a little softer, but still emotionless. "There is no one named Allison in this apartment. I'm calling 911. This time, I actually dialed. As I was giving the dispatcher my address, I kept looking through the peephole. He didn't move, didn't knock again, didn't argue, just stood there. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and stay inside. An officer was on the way. It would take about 10 minutes. While I waited, the man did something new. He raised his hand very slowly and placed his palm flat against my door, right next to the peephole. His fingers spread slightly, like he was feeling the texture of the wood. Then he leaned his forehead against the door, directly where mine would be if there were no peephole between us. His voice was quieter now, almost like a whisper, but still flat. "She told me to come here. She said she lives behind the blue door." My door was blue, a faded, chipped blue, but still blue. I didn't reply. I just stayed there, frozen, listening to my own breath in the phone speaker. The dispatcher kept asking, "Ma'am, are you still there?" I couldn't answer. We stood like that, his forehead on my door, my eye at the peephole, for what felt like hours, but was probably 3 minutes. Then suddenly he straightened up, dropped his hand, and walked away down the hall without a word. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They took a statement, walked around the complex, but didn't find anyone matching my description. One of the officers asked if I knew anyone named Allison. I said no. He asked if someone might be messing with me. I said I didn't think so. They told me to call again if he came back. He didn't come back the next night, or the night after that. For a week, I slept with one ear listening for knocks that never came. Just when I started to think it was over, I got a text from an unknown number while I was at work. Is Allison there? No context, no name, no emoji, just that sentence. I blocked the number immediately. That same shift, during a slow hour, I was chatting with my coworker at the motel's front desk. The motel had one of those old cork boards in the back office with employee notices and random papers pinned to it. While we were talking, my eye drifted to a faded, curled piece of paper in the corner. It was an old incident log from months before I started working there. The handwriting was messy, but one line stood out. 2:40 a.m. Male guest wandering hallway, knocking on a random doors, asking if Allison is in. Said she told him to meet her at the motel with the blue doors. Escorted off property. Our motel doors were all painted the same dark blue. My stomach dropped. The date on the paper was 6 months before I moved into my apartment. I asked my manager later if she remembered that guest. She frowned, tried to think, then said, "Yeah, kind of. Security walked him out, but he wasn't violent, just off. Kept saying he had the wrong place and that she moved apartments. He didn't give a last name." I moved out of my apartment a month later after my lease ended. I never heard the 3 slow knocks again. But sometimes, when I'm scrolling through my phone late at night in my new place, I'll see a random spam text come in. Is this the wrong number? I always delete them instantly, because somewhere out there, a man is still looking for a woman named Allison who lives behind a blue door. And one day, he might just knock on the right one.